Welcome to the Dr. Geo podcast. I am your host, Dr. Geo, where it's my intention to help you with your urological function and how to live better with age. Today's interview podcast episode is special to me because it is a spouse of a patient that I had. Her name is Fen Yee. And we discussed several things. I always want to highlight the partner, the spouse of the one helping their prostate cancer husband or partner, because you could get lost in that in that area. And I wanted Fen Yee to tell us, what was your role like? How did you help? How did you sustain your own help? What was the process like? This is special in many ways, and one is because her husband Jan, he did pass away, and you've heard me before. I am unapologetically optimistic. I deal with prostate cancer every day of my life, and almost everyone who comes to my office with prostate cancer actually lives better after that diagnosis. But most clinicians, and I'm no exception, we think of the ones we lose. And so then Jan is in my mind often in terms of trying to unravel why did this happen to him? What was the deal? And we're going to talk about this in more detail at some other episode why Jan's issue was so advanced. He had what's called neuroendocrine prostate cancer. We'll talk about that later. In this particular episode, I'm excited because Fen Yee talks about how can the support of the caretaker take better care of themselves. Enjoy this episode with a prostate cancer partner, Fen Yee. All right, Fen Yee, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. This is different. Many of the other episodes have been on a lot to do with prostate cancer. There's quite a few of them in terms of what to do and so forth. We even have interviews with other physicians. But I felt that I've always felt that it is important to get the partner, the wife, the spouse of the person who's had prostate cancer involved and help them with the process. I felt compelled to that. We do have an episode for Mother's Day that we recorded on, an ode to the wife who is working with and helping their spouse, their husband with prostate cancer. So I thought of no one better than you to have this, I think, very unique episode. As you went through with Jan, your husband, who passed away about a year ago, roughly, right? A little bit more than a year ago.
A year and a half ago, he passed January 2021. Right. So we're almost year and a half.
About a year and a half ago. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I like to start with, because I think. And we'll talk about Jan. You and I have spoken about this at length, where I think about him almost every day. And there's while my audience, I am unapologetically optimistic, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that for most men that I've ever seen, they do better after prostate cancer, right? So they get diagnosed and now they have the, oh crap moment, and they're saying, all right, I'm really going to take care of my health. And they actually do better overall, and not only from prostate cancer, but overall. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. So Jan is one of 3 people within my over 20-year career that I know that kind of, did not survive from the prostate cancer diagnosis. So I think about him all the time. But I think that we agreed last time we spoke that I probably saw Jan shortly after he was diagnosed so that I can help him with integrative and natural approaches. How long ago was that? And tell me about that diagnosis when he was first diagnosed, your role at that point, and how your role changed within time. So we're going to kind of break this down and unpack it. So that first diagnosis, maybe 7-8 years ago, I think. Take us back and tell us what was what happened and what you were thinking.
So Jan's considered one of in the realm of prostate cancer. A lot of people still think of prostate cancer as an old man's disease.
Yeah.
To provide you a little context, Jan was diagnosed December 2013, just before Christmas. Actually, we got his firm diagnosis the day we were supposed to fly out for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
But he was 45 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So with the notion, it really sort of debunks the notion that it's an old person's disease.
100%.
And we had, the process that led him to actually even be diagnosed was that he had urinary symptoms. So he wasn't even being screened for the disease yet. And that's one of these challenges where for a lot of folks, they don't start thinking about PSAs, or doctors don't recommend PSAs necessarily until, for say 50 years old, unless there's, significant family history.
That's right.
Which actually in his case, there was family history. Somehow he had overlooked it, as had his GP.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were diagnosed December 2013, and we were diagnosed at stage 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something that's often misunderstood, right? When you get prostate cancer when you're younger, because usually you're not screened yet, you have a higher likelihood that you're diagnosed at a later stage.
That's right. Do you remember that his PSA at the time?
It was low. It was double digit, but low. So I think 25 or something like that. Right. And compared to the tumor mass at that point, we were told, but you don't have a very high PSA actually relative to how big your tumors are. Well, what we've learned since is that when you have an aggressive form of prostate cancer, which unfortunately was what Jan had, your PSA actually doesn't spike as much.
Right.
Because we have been told, usually people with this much tumor mass in their body, they're seeing PSAs in the
hundreds, thousands,
hundreds and thousands, right? And they're like, you have a really low PSA. And well, we thought that meant we were lucky.
Right.
We didn't realize that meant we had
you were high-fiving
because there's just so much that's misunderstood about prostate cancer out there. And
what was so so you went in, he had these urinary problems, then PSA, then that diagnosis came, then he was diagnosed. What, and I ask this question because I tell all my patients or my new patients, do you have a partner? If so, bring that partner with you. And the reason for that is because maybe it's a gender thing. So men are rough and tough, or at least we think we are. But when we have this diagnosis, our brains just shut down. I've seen that many times in cases where I've had to diagnose some people. And it's almost like this Charlie Brown kind of noise in our head after that. Yeah, you have prostate cancer. And then it's like, wah, 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 wah. So the partner, in my opinion, is the one that's really honed in. Yes, emotional, but it seems to have their emotions better controlled, and they're able to ask good questions and things like that. So that diagnosis, what was your thinking, and what were you doing at that point back in 2013 when you heard the diagnosis? So
it's funny you talk about the Charlie Brown moment, because I do remember the moment when we were delivered an initial diagnosis, and then we got the confirmed diagnosis. But what I remember is the initial diagnosis when we had some imaging done before any biopsies, and we were getting the results of the imaging. And I looked over and I could tell that he just wasn't absorbing anything.
Right.
Right. And
you know him as your husband. You know him well, and you can see it that he's like not there.
He's not there.
Yeah.
He's not there. And we talked about it subsequently. He was like, I was just in shock.
Yeah.
Right. He was like, I don't think I heard anything after those words. Right. And you talk about, bringing a partner along. I would say even for people who don't have partners, to bring a good friend whom you trust, male or female, right, along, someone whom you trust, because the reality is that there's so much that gets thrown at you in any doctor's visit.
Yeah.
Once you're on the cancer path, and it's not specific to cancer alone. I imagine that any major diagnosis, right?
Sure.
There's only so much. We're lay people.
Yeah.
There's only so much information you can absorb at any given time because sometimes terms are used that you don't recognize and all of that. But I was there with him. I did not typically at that point go to doctor's visits with him because he was otherwise a healthy person.
Right.
But he had gone to get this imaging done after, multiple urologist visits where they couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally they were like, unlikely because you're so young, but let's just get some, get a biopsy done. And he was like, well, before you start poking around, why don't we do some imaging? So he had advocated for himself to get imaging done.
When was your first visit? So you were not there when he was in first diagnosed, is that correct? Like that?
No, I was there.
You were
I was
there
at the first diagnosis because he went to get imaging done. And I think he had the inkling that something was wrong because they told him to come back at 6 p.m.
Right.
to get the results. And so he was like, will you come with me? And so I said, okay, fine. Because it was such a unique request for him to make.
Right.
Right.
It shows a sign of like vulnerability. Again, of course, men are vulnerable all the time, but we don't show it. So he was, showing that, showing his vulnerability to you, his partner. And did you sense, what was your role, or you felt your role was at that point? So what was the supportive role? What did you do? Was it words? Did you say everything's going to be okay? What was that about?
When he asked, I said, okay, fine. Honestly, I think I probably thought that this was excessive and unnecessary.
Right.
Honestly, because the C word hadn't entered our lives at that point.
Yeah.
And we were both, he was in his 40s, I was in my 30s. We were healthy.
Right.
We had no comorbidities.
Right.
Our doctor's visits were limited to annual checkups at best.
Right.
And so the idea that you might need me to come to a doctor's visit with you, I was like, oh, that's, kind of paranoid, if you would.
Right.
But then I was like, all right, fine. It's end of day. I can do this. Let's go. And so we went and we ended up waiting because the doctor was obviously, as always, not available on time.
Right.
And we ended up getting the diagnosis at like 9 p.m. at night.
Okay.
And when they kept us till 9 p.m., then I was like, at first I was angry because I was just like, that's really disrespectful. You expect us to sit around for 3 hours. And then at some point I was like, wait, something's wrong, right? If they want you to sit around that long and not just come back the next day, what's going on? But then, we finally met with the imaging doctor and he walked us through the images and he was like, we need a biopsy to confirm, but based on everything I've seen in my vast experience imaging prostates, and because he did, imaging and image guided therapies, he was like, this is prostate cancer. But I have to confirm with the biopsy. Will you be okay with the biopsy? We got the biopsy done. I think we were done with the biopsy at 1 a.m. that morning. The fact that he stayed late and helped and got that for us, I will forever be thankful.
Yeah.
Right. 2 days later, we got the biopsy results, and that later that day was when we met you, because when we got the biopsy results and the full download of the scans and whatnot, we were basically told that chances of him being ever cancer-free were low double digits. So I'm talking teens, 12% or something low like that of ever being cancer-free. And
do you remember what that biopsy result really showed? Do you remember, or the imagings? Did it show at the time that it was outside the capsule?
It was extracapsular, so it's already outside the capsule. It was there was seminal vesicle involvement.
Yeah, right.
It was abutting his pelvic bone,
right,
and had pushed into his bladder,
right.
So it was pretty significant. In fact, the surgeon whom we met with, who, initially what that prepped us for initially was, they'll take it out, you'll be fine.
Sure.
Maybe there's some radiation afterwards, but you'll be good because you're a young guy. Like,
Right.
how hard can it be?
Right.
And then when the results fully came back, it was a completely different discussion.
Yeah.
Of nope, surgery's now off the table.
Yeah.
Radiation at best, but don't know if that's really going to work. And you're never going to be cancer free, most likely, because it was, like I said, low teen percentages of being ever cancer free.
Right.
And it just was a very bleak response
at that moment, 2013.
Right? At that moment.
Who found
and that's
me?
when we met you.
Yeah. So how did that? And the reason why I'm asking is because, again, I see those, right? The partner, the spouse, they roll up their sleeves, right? And I would say oftentimes, sometimes men actually find, but oftentimes there's a spouse who says, look, we need to know all the options here. And they're the ones that found me. So I'm curious to know back then, and I don't remember, did you find me or did Jan do the research and how did that come about?
No, actually kind of neither of us. You've always been a significant part of our cancer journey,
right?
Because we met you really, you were the first ray of hope we got. You always played a positive role in our cancer journey. Whenever Jan was sort of like, things looked really dire and bleak, he was like, I'm going to go talk to Gio. And
listen, I always say I played the therapist role, and I really, and I do that with love. And if I don't address the mind body component, or any practitioner, actually, this is a humanizing scenario. And I always say hope costs nothing. Just give more. This is why I absolutely detest these when physicians sometimes give X amount of months or years to live to anyone. Who am I? Who are you to get for a death sentence of any kind, and so forth. So I'm glad. Thank you for saying that, because that really brings me a lot of joy into my heart, because sometimes you just do what you do and you have no idea. Right. So we were at the hospital and we were just destroyed, honestly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We had packed our bags that morning thinking we might still fly out for Christmas to be with our families. We, had met with the surgeon via phone. So we had physically gone in, but he had already left for the holidays. So he dialed in, and this is pre-COVID, right? So you're not used to talking to your doctor over the phone. And there wasn't even video.
Right.
And then we met with the radiologist who had equally dire responses and outcomes and recommendations. And we were you could just tell we were destroyed.
Yeah.
And the nurse who had shepherded us between the surgeon and the radiologist, I think she took a look at us and she must have pitied us, because she's like, look, there's this person who we have on staff. It's a naturopath, Dr. Gio. Would you want to meet with him? He's got some non-traditional alternatives. He might be helpful. And we were just, at that point, anyone who could remotely have given us any positive news, the answer was yes. Because we were just reeling. And so we met with you.
I see. That was a referral.
And we had already started, that fall, we had already started exploring certain things like Forks Over Knives and things like that. For those who don't know, Forks Over Knives is a platform that focuses on plant-based diets.
Right. Based from a documentary video that's out on Netflix that was very popular. Anytime somebody proudly tells me I'm doing plant-based, I say, okay, which documentary did you just watch, right? Is it Forks Over Knives? Is it a Game Changer is the most recent one, right? Which one did you recently watch? Yeah, that's right.
Right. But I also read the China study.
The China study,
And that's one of the seminal publications about associations between cancer and diets, and plant and animal-based diets. And so we had started experimenting a bit with like, okay, just eating more vegetables.
Yeah. Let's start there. Sure.
Right. Because the average American doesn't eat enough vegetables.
That's right. How was Jan's diet? How was Jan's diet and your diet as a couple prior to the diagnosis? From a dietary perspective, was there a big change after he was diagnosed?
There was, right. You had recommended you had a grid, I remember, the grid of 5 columns of, ranging from really great for you to really bad for you to moderate.
Right.
And he looked at it, and he came from he grew up with a diet that was very focused on bread, potatoes, dairy, whether it's milk, cream, cheese,
right,
and meat.
That's the Belgium diet.
The Belgian diet, yes. And chocolate for breakfast, right? So kind of everything that's, if you look at anti-cancer diets, they'd be like, no.
Exactly.
And I still remember he was like, look, we came out from the conversation with you and we knew we were going to affect change, but he looked at it and he was like, I can't eat anything. Those were his words. There's nothing I can eat.
Right.
And so it was really an education process of, showing him how to read nutrition labels.
Did you have to learn some of this yourself? Was it something that you had to, or were you already? I've known you for almost 10 years, and to me, it's like, yeah, you're a natural person. You've done, you've even you cook. So now I can't even remember the early days. Were you already into natural plant-based eating at the time, or not really?
I wasn't.
Right.
In fact, I'm still plant-based at this point, but prior to all of this, I was a big fan of steaks. Like bring me a steak and lobster dinner any day, all day, So it was interesting and it was different. But I've always been fascinated with food.
Right.
And I've always been open to trying new and different foods. So I think that was helpful. And at some point in my life, I had taught myself how to read a nutrition label.
Right.
And I forget exactly the genesis as to why it was, but I had taught myself how to read the nutrition label to understand what I was putting in my body. Diet-wise, we were what the average person would consider healthy in that we, didn't eat an excessive amount of processed foods, but we didn't eat an amount of we didn't do very many TV dinners or frozen meals and things like that. But we didn't do that because we were basically eating out most of the time, which is its own form of unhealthy, right? And so it was a journey for us to figure out what we could eat. So he basically went gluten-free, right? Because he realized that he actually was gluten intolerant once we cleaned up his diet.
Right.
We went dairy-free. We went, and we basically became whole food plant-based. And it was a process of learning how to cook.
Yeah,
I still remember a friend coming over and being like, let me show you how.
Right.
Because, and that was a big thing, right? So you talk about the importance of the spouse. I think it's also the importance of your village.
Right. Interesting.
We basically reached out to friends. And this is one thing that I have to applaud Jan for, right? He decided that he was not going to hide his diagnosis. There's still a lot of people out there who feel that there's a stigma to cancer, and especially something like prostate cancer, which is a very private part of your body, and they don't feel like they want to share it or don't think they can share it.
Right.
And he did the opposite. He said, look, I need people to know this because it's going to affect how I behave. It's going to, like sometimes you're going to have to cancel because a doctor's appointment runs late or whatever might happen. And so he's like, and so he disclosed fully. And I took a page out of his book based on that. So he modeled behavior as to how he wanted to track this and show himself within this new diagnosis. And I took a page out of that and I reached out to my own friends and I said, look, I need to support him. I need you to support me. Right. And I did something where you talked about vulnerability and whatnot. I knew that I had to be a cheerleader for him, that me bringing my fears to the table while they were valid was not going to be helpful to him, especially in the first days. But I also needed an outlet for my own emotions and my own fears, right? Because I am one of these, everyone's different. Some people journal, some people are great meditating and focusing on their own, whatever. I'm one of these people where I need to just say it out loud.
I see.
And somehow saying it out loud and knowing that someone's hearing it helps lighten my load somehow, right? So I reached out and I basically reached up to a cohort of people whom I said, you're being tagged because you are people who are part of my inner circle whom I trust. This is what's happened. And I don't know what this means because no one told us. So you talked about the 6 months or being given a timeline on your disease. It sucks, but it also helps. So no one told us what the timeline was. But then but as a result, I remember my initial days being like, am I going to have to plan a funeral for my husband in 6 months? Because no one told us, and we didn't know, and we didn't know to ask. Right? We didn't realize that. And the reality is, with stage 4 prostate cancer, it could be a year. It could be. We had 7, right? But for some, it's a year, depending on how stage 4 you actually are. Right. And the physicality of your body and the general healthiness of your body going into it and all of that. But I reached out to friends and I said, look, this is what's happened. I need you to be here for me. And oh, by the way, we changed our diets. We're going to be doing this and we need you to be supportive of that. So we had friends who would be like, okay, we're going to go see you for a meal. We're going to find a vegan restaurant because that's the closest to plant-based as you could find. And this is 2013, where even in New York City, there were not that many
even in New York
restaurants.
City. That's right. Pause there for a second, Fen Yee, because actually you said something really important, I think, for the partners and spouses of men with prostate cancer. You were looking for an outlet. And so this village was part of your outlet. Talk a little bit more about that, because what I see sometimes that happens is that, honestly, oftentimes I see the spouses getting ill themselves from being such a caretaker and ignoring themselves and ignoring their own emotions and their own health. What were your outlets? What were all of your outlets? How did you take care of yourself? Or if you didn't every time I saw you, you look great. You showed me no signs that you were, but I'm sure there were moments where you were just depleted and things. What were you able to do to take care of yourself? And what was it that you didn't do that now, looking back, you say, yeah, I should have done what to take care of yourself?
So I reached out to friends and we told them about the diagnosis. And I'm very lucky in that I have a lot of different friends who have different life experiences than I do. And so some came in and said, we'll teach you how to cook. Others were like, hey, have you thought of a support group? I didn't even think I would need a support group at that point, right? But I had been through periods of trauma on my own previous to that. And I knew I needed a therapist because I don't process emotions well. I am a doer. I act. I respond. I problem solve. I'm really great at all those things. Handling my own emotions, very uncomfortable, very difficult. And so
That's a great point.
And so some of it is just sort of knowing yourself,
self-awareness, who you are, how are you wired, and then based on that, you can figure out more of how you can help, but also how you can take care of yourself,
and where you need help,
you need help.
And so I signed up for a therapist. I went to a support group that was in person. I learned so much from
was
people
it a
who were in the
prostate cancer support group, or was it for spouses or partners specifically?
My initial support group was a caregiver support group.
Caregiver support group, great.
A cancer caregiver support group.
Excellent.
And it was done through Gilda, which is now called Red Door. And they have been phenomenal. They provide everything from information it's from caregiver and people with cancer support groups through bereavement, but also they have wellness activities, whether it's laughing yoga, knitting.
Oh, that's great.
So many things that's really great. About the wellness of the person. And so they were a key part of anchoring me through cancer.
Excellent. And the name of it, we'll have it in our show notes. Is Gilda?
Well, they changed their name recently, so it's now called Red Door.
Red Door. Excellent. Great.
Yeah. And
are they national, Fen Yee? Do you know? We'll figure it. We'll find that out.
I think they're definitely in the New York tri-state area. And the whole point of them switching their name to Red Door was that they did want to expand nationally.
Excellent.
The other one, for those who are not in the New York City tri-state area that does a lot of great work in this space, is Cancer Care.
Great.
Cancer Care provides great support, not just for the person living with cancer, but also the rest of their family and friends who are their caregivers and their support.
Excellent. So you have these organizations. You also had your own therapist, And then
I had
you
a
had
therapist.
and then you had friends that said, look, we'll help you with the cooking. And so it was like three groups that really helped you kind of keep yourself, again, stable and healthy as best as I could see. Was there anything along the way that you said, yeah, I mean, there was a time, I'm sure there were times where I wasn't taking care of myself and I should have done something. Was there a time, or these groups actually helped you get through the whole journey?
These groups were huge. There were other groups that got added along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one component that often gets overlooked. So these groups were helpful with what I'll call mostly the mental and emotional aspects of it. Then there's the physical aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that Jan and I committed to doing he committed to doing was to be more physically active, because we had been fairly sedentary.
That's
right? We were
he committed to do it. We are too many people. He
committed to do it.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah,
No, he committed to doing it, and that's actually something that's very important too, right? As a caregiver, it was important for me to realize this and keep it sort of front and center in my mind that this is his journey. It's our journey as well, but I am on this journey to support him and to help him through his journey. It is not my journey to lead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And let me just repeat that, right?
Yeah,
it
go
is
ahead. Mm-hmm.
Ultimately his journey.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because there might be times when I might say, hey, I would rather do this than that. But at the end of the day, it's because it's his journey. He has to have the control. He has to establish and make the decisions for himself, because he is the one who has to live through the experience and live through the repercussions to whatever we do to his body. Right.
I love you saying that.
Huge.
I love you saying that. I love you. And thank you so much. What I notice in my practice is that sometimes the partner / the spouse takes too much control and they make it their journey. And one thing that there is a difference, right? There is a gender difference. Yeah, obviously women do many things and they can produce, but there is a gender difference. One of the things with men is they like to have control, or sometimes even have the illusion that they have control, but they'll believe it, right? They want to be in control of themselves. And I find that sometimes the spouse, sometimes are too much. They make every decision and they don't let their husband, partner, have to lead the way for themselves. So I thank you for saying that. That's actually key.
I think it's huge because, especially if you are, and I hate this word, but if you're the patient, a lot gets done to you.
That's right.
In the medical world.
Right. That's right.
You don't really have control over what is done within a clinical hospital setting.
Yeah.
What you do have is you have autonomy over your own body and your autonomy to make your own decisions. And as much as we can maintain that becomes important, because it allows them to maintain a sense of pride, confidence, which all helps with well-being and mental health, and all of that. So Jan decided he was going to work out, I think, 3 times a week.
Right. Was he a workout person prior?
No.
Not at all, right?
No, neither of us were.
Right.
Neither of us were. Workouts were like if we could find a time. So if we went once or twice a week, that was a great week. Mostly the gym membership was a way to support a business that wasn't being used at all.
Right. It was a donation, though you didn't get the tax benefit from those donations.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. But one of the things, though, was I realized that it's easier to do this when you're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
So when we decided he was going to change his diet and do what we call the Geo diet, but the Thrive diet,
right.
I changed my diet alongside with him, because I was like, all right, we're going to do this together.
How important is that, Fen Yee? Because I mean, I don't want to. I think it's important, but I'm not in it like you guys, right? So, how important is it that the spouse, does the plan, the protocol, the lifestyle with their partner with prostate cancer. And to what degree? Is it 100%? Like they should do the exercise. Obviously, the supplements are different, but they should do the exercise. They should do them. If they go plant-based, should they do everything? What's your take on that?
We did the diet together, and we did the exercise to different levels at different points.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that as a result, I became healthier for it.
Correct. Yeah. Right.
So
that's right.
So the silver lining of prostate cancer was that I became healthier.
Right.
For
If there's any silver lining, it's definitely that, for sure. That's right. That's right.
So he decided to start working out. I started working out too at one point, because I was just like, all right, if I model behavior, it might egg him on to do it too, right? And so it became this thing where we both had we didn't work out together, but we each had workout schedules that made sense for us.
Right.
And just, sometimes knowing that your loved one's going to the gym and making that a priority, then you don't feel as guilty when you're like, hey, I got to go to the gym. We're not doing this tomorrow because I need to go do this at this time. There's a class I want to take, or like I'm a big class person. So there's a class I want to take. He would just like squeeze it in and do his own thing. And he had a trainer for a while because that was what he needed to jumpstart working out. Right. But I think doing it together helps. It also makes sense because we are a very small household. We have no kids. Right. So it's a household of two. And really, when we changed our diets, it was out of simplicity, because I was like, we have two people in the house. We're not cooking two separate meals for two people. That makes zero sense. It also made things easier when we were eating out with friends, because instead of like Jan being the one who needed special catering for food, it was us. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there was less othering as a result of that.
Right.
And that, I think that helped.
Sure.
I don't think he was ever embarrassed about it. Right. But there were once or twice when I remember him feeling like, oh, I don't want to make a big deal. I don't want to be that difficult house guest, and so me being able to say, hey, this is what works for our diet. This is how we are choosing to live our lives now. That kind of made it a bit easier, right, for people whom we were socializing with.
And it was a lifestyle, which I think it's important. Words matter, and it defines who you become, as opposed to a diet temporary for a specific goal, and maybe I won't do it. It became a life. This is just how we live. This is just what we do. And certainly it seems like you doing it with him became a lifestyle for you two as a family, as a husband and wife. As you went on through through the years, so from time of diagnosis to the time where he passed on, it was 7 years. Mm-hmm. What do you feel that your role changed as and some people are going to know this with the intro. I think Jan, I just never met such a strong person in my life. I mean, right till the end, he was strong. He looked great. And even when you guys went to Belgium, I was like, wow, I can't believe, you're going to Belgium. And he made it there. You had a trip prior to that. I think, if I remember correctly, you went, came back, and here he was. What was, as the news got less than optimal, let's say, and moved on, did your role change there? Did you, was it more supportive, more caring? What was your role as time went on to, towards the end?
Right. Absolutely. So there are so many different aspects to caregiving. Yeah. Right. And some people use the word caretaking. Mm-hmm. Either or, I guess. I think there's a bit of a difference, nuanced difference to the two. But initially, it was really about, honestly, doing research. Mm-hmm. What are the different treatment options? Where are the best specialists? Who can we go to? Where should we get a second opinion? Should we get a second opinion? What does the science say behind this? We would validate what we were reading or hearing from the doctors, because we as a couple sort of needed knowledge, and we needed to know and understand and decide for ourselves. Not that we didn't trust our doctors, but we kind of needed that extra research to make us feel that we could be in control and that we were making educated decisions.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
But that's not
you partnered with
stuff,
your
right?
doctors for sure. And you guys always had amazing questions. So you did a lot of that research, and you tried to figure out, you were trying to interpret that research yourself and trying to figure out what it really said and trying to figure out what you do with that information, and have had better questions. You guys always were loaded with great questions, not only with me, but with everyone.
We game planned. We game planned before every doctor's appointment.
Right.
What are the questions we want asked? Okay, now let's prioritize, because we're not going to get the doctors for indefinite amounts of time. So what's the big takeaway question we absolutely want answered, and we're not going to leave until it gets answered?
Right.
And that was the point where, like, doctors might hate me for saying this, but we would be like, all right, this is the one thing we absolutely have to have answered. And if we don't, and we're just going to keep asking and coming at it from different angles until we feel like we fully understand what the doctor's saying in response to this one question, whatever that one question might be. And every doctor's visit we went into, we kind of had at least one of those questions where we're like, this is the question we need answered.
Right. Right.
And if it takes 10 minutes, if it takes 45 minutes, that's what we're there for, to get answered. That was it. And then, of course, helping adapt our lifestyles and change our lifestyles. Right. But once that was done, I mean, honestly, to an extent, it was quote unquote easy going for a while. And I say that it sounds crazy, but we had some of our best years in the initial years post-diagnosis when, he was stage 4, he was being treated, but the cancer was under sufficient control that there were no symptoms that affected our lifestyles.
Right.
No non-manageable symptoms that affected our lifestyles. Right. And so we would we traveled the world.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a big part of, he wanted to live life.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad he did, because we also realized that we were never going to be the couple that was going to retire at 60 and then travel the world.
Right.
Or, do whatever it is people do when they retire. So we were like, okay, we're going to start doing this in our 40s, because that's the life we have ahead of us. So that was us being realistic too, right? Optimistic, but realistic.
Right. Right.
And then obviously towards the end, the last year was the year where really his physical deterioration really, really happened.
Yeah.
Because up until, even January, March 2020, we were still traveling. He would help me with household duties, chores. We took turns cooking or doing laundry or grocery shopping, all of that, right? But as his physical deterioration accelerated, because the treatments got harsher, it was harder and harder for him to withstand it. And I mean, he withstood more than most people did.
100%. I remember that.
Even as it was. And we do think a large part of it were the protocols we had in conjunction with you that allowed him to withstand all these protocols. But, at some point it got where he wasn't really able to, when we did our trip to Belgium, I carried all the luggage because he had just had radiation to his ribs for bone metastases.
Right.
And he wasn't really allowed to carry heavy weights. So that's where the physical care, self-care comes in, right? Like at some point I realized that my staying physically fit wasn't just about me staying physically fit. It was also like, hey, at some point I might have to lift him up. I might have to carry heavy things because he can't carry heavy things anymore. I'm going to have to open that jam jar on my own because he may not have the strength.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that aspect of self-care as well.
So you're staying in shape because you're sort of saying, I'm going to support him, but you never know what, the other reasons why staying in shape is so important. That includes lifting heavy things. You were healthier. I mean, these are stressful moments, but throughout those stressful moments, because you're sort of you're eating well with him, and you're sort of sustaining your health in a decent way. And that's actually a very important takeaway, I think, for the listener. The role of the spouse partner, and how important it is for them to actually, do the work with their husband, their partner. It's supportive, helps them not be alone with the process. Also helps them kind of to sustain their own health and make sure that they're staying well. That is great.
That's something that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
In caregiving circles, you hear about the fact that you can't help anyone until you've helped yourself. So the same thing you hear on a plane, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Right. Yeah.
So many women I know, forgo their own health checkups.
Yeah.
They skip meals. They do all of that. And I came about it from a perspective of, you don't want to see me hangry. I don't function well hangry. So I'm going to eat regularly, and I'm going to take care of that. Right. I need sleep.
Right.
If I don't sleep sufficiently, I can't make good decisions. And if he's in a position where he can't make good decisions either because of the effects of the drugs he's on and so forth, well, then that makes two of us, and that doesn't help. Now, of course, what's defined as good sleep, or what's defined as eating properly, that changes over time depending on circumstances, right? There are going to be days when you can't have 3 square meals. There are going to be days when you can't sleep for 8 hours. There are going to be days when you don't get your workout in. But recognizing and making sure you do try and prioritize that, it is important. And it is important to be able to have those open discussions with my own doctors knew what I was going through around my husband, because his health had an impact on my health, right? So my doctors all knew that I was caregiving for someone with stage 4 cancer, and that his cancer was, when it started going sideways, that it was going sideways. We talked openly about whether or not it made sense for me to go on anti-anxiety medication, because whether it was going to help me handle my life better at that point in time. And at some point, it did become a situation where I was like, yeah, actually, you know what? Maybe that makes sense now, right? Because it's going to allow me to focus better and be a better caregiver, right? But it was also important for me to continue to have my own life. And there are different views on, this. Everyone comes to caregiving with a different thing. I can only talk about my journey. My journey was one where I knew, and Jan knew this too, at some point, that he was going to pass before I did, and that I would have to find a way to live life without him. And so for me, it was also important to continue living my own life. That while caregiving was a huge component of my life, it could not be the end all be all of my life.
Excellent.
Right.
I think that is well said, Fen Yee. And I think maybe you have one or two other things kind of to close it off. I think this is going to be so helpful. This episode is going to be so helpful to so many people. And I really thank you so much for joining me here. I feel like I just feel a lot of sense of gratitude for you to. I didn't know that you were going to say yes to this podcast interview, and I think because I know that is not the most pleasant thing. Any final thoughts that you have?
First of all, I'm very flattered that you included me, because I do think that caregivers are special. They are often overlooked, the silent martyrs, so to speak. And so my final thoughts would be to not be the silent martyr. One should be able or willing to give as much as you are willing and able to. Right? There is no need or expectation that you should do everything for the person all at once. That's why, and that goes back to the notion of it takes a village. We had friends help out. We had we had friends help get him to the hospital and back. We had friends who helped us do research. We had people we had friends from all over the world who were like, have you spoken to this doctor? Oh, by the way, there's this specialist in my country. And, there's so-and-so, and there's this other treatment that someone's talked about. So we were sort of crowdsourcing everything. Call it crowdsourcing, call it leading on your village. The point is, humans are not solo beings. And therefore, this is not a journey that is your sole responsibility as a single caregiver. Figure out your resources, develop those resources, ask for help, ask for guidance, and take it when it's offered. Anytime anyone was like, can I help? The answer was yes.
Yes, you can. And here's how.
Might be yes, here's how, or it might be, yes, I don't know how yet.
I see.
But
yeah,
yes,
right.
And I will keep you in my thoughts for when something's needed. I will tap you.
That's great.
Right?
That's great.
So that would be my closing thought.
Well said.
You don't have to do everything on your own.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Fen Yee. I really appreciate this. And I think that, you're going to become famous from this, whether you like it or not, as a caregiver to the caregiver kind of thing of some sort or another. Thank you so much. We'll reconnect soon. And thank you. Have a great day. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Gio.
All right.
I will be in touch.
All right.
Take care.
Yeah.